Get ready to enter a brave new world with your host, Vasant Dar.
Brave New World is supported by the Center for Data Science, or CDS, at NYU. If your organization is interested in engaging with CDS through student projects, please email cdsindustry@nyu.edu. For more color on the podcast and additional commentary, please subscribe to my newsletter at vasantdar.substack.com. Hello, and welcome to Brave New World. It's always great to catch up with former students, and especially so when they go way back and are willing to share their career experiences. Joining me today is Paulo Kaiser, CEO of Plative, a global consulting company specializing in tech solutions. I've been getting a lot of questions recently from students on how to prepare for a rapidly changing business world of ChatGPT. What does it mean to be literate if you're interested in a career in the business world? What's a good way to get a toehold and grow? What tools and thinking do you need in order to succeed? Who better to talk to about these questions than someone who has successfully navigated and grown up in the world of consulting and tech since the dawn of the internet? Paulo, welcome to Brave New World. I am delighted to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Vasant. This is not only a pleasure, but a first-time pleasure as well. So I can find no better way to do it and with a person to do it with than with you.
Thank you. That's kind. So where are you at the moment?
So I am in New York City right now. The city's so nice, they named it twice. I'm on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And apparently, just to set the stage, Manhattan is now at about 65 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of February. So we truly are in a brave new world when it comes to climate as well.
Yeah, it's really insane, isn't it? I'm actually in Greenwich Village myself, right across from my office at NYU, and I am sweating as we speak in February, and I don't have my heat on. I've got my windows open. It's that warm in here.
It's nuts.
Yeah. So, Paulo, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. What's been your journey until this point where you're the CEO of a consulting company? What have you been up to?
Sure. So I am originally from Brazil, born and raised in Rio de Janeiro, and came to this country for college after finalizing my studies in Rio. And after college, went to Japan, came back to New York, and then have been here for almost 30 years now, which is a kind of a crazy thing to say. And started off in liberal arts, jumped around a lot of different ways, and ended up in consulting. At the start of my career, it was actually my second job. My first job was as a high school teacher of English for the Ministry of Education in Japan. And I came back to the US, and like most people with a brain who don't know what to do with it, I ended up in consulting. So I started working at Coopers & Lybrand in consulting many, many years ago. Enjoyed that so much and found that I had so much to learn that went to graduate school. That's where we met at NYU, and did a couple of graduate degrees at NYU, and then embarked on a fun ride through the first wave of .com 1.0, .com 2.0, and I've been in technology ever since. About half of my career has been or a little bit over half of my career has been in the software space, enterprise, business to business, e-commerce. I've done a lot of different things, pretty much every job or most jobs you can have in a software company. I've been everything from a product manager to a president. And then the balance of my career, still also in technology, has been in professional services. And yes, currently CEO. Prior to this was the chief operating officer of a company called Blue Wolf, which was a leader in the Salesforce integration space. Joined Blue Wolf when it had less than 100 people on the Salesforce side, had a fantastic group, fantastic team. And as a team, we took that to over 1,200, 1,300 people and sold it to IBM along the way. So a lot of scars, a lot of learnings, a lot of fun, and a lot of experiences that I'm applying, but not only applying, because there's a lot to learn where I'm at right now as the CEO of a company called Plative. And Plative is focused on Salesforce and Oracle NetSuite implementations. And I joined the company as an advisor a little over 2.5 years ago to the founder, and after a couple of hours a week became a couple more hours a week, was invited to join and sit in the captain's chair, which was a first for me. And I've been there so far ever since. It's been 2 years full time. I joined Plative, had about 50 people. We're now over triple the size at about 100, almost 160 people and growing.
Wow. So, Paulo, it feels like forever ago that you were at Stern. I mean, you're one of my, actually not one of my, you're my first student on the podcast. I had a former Stern student, Jeff Tieper from Microsoft, on last year, but he never took any classes with me. But remind me, when was it that you graduated? I remember it was sort of the dawn of the internet and the .com era, which was quite a while. But remind me, when was it exactly?
Do we really have to age ourselves this way? So let's just say that it was last century. And to be more precise, I graduated from Stern with my MBA in 97. And then I did a master's in information systems also at Stern. It was a joint program with Courant at the time. And I graduated that in 98. So we probably crossed paths in either 97 or 96, 97, thereabouts, in a class on artificial intelligence. And, I've told you this story before, but it bears repeating, that I recall you bringing up an Excel sheet and showing the class how you could create a neural net using an Excel sheet. And that has stayed with me since then.
That is so bizarre, so bizarre, right? It's these little things that we remember. But I'm remembering the time now. I had been away from Stern myself. I'd been on Wall Street for a few years, so that was about the time that we met, and I'd actually brought machine learning to Wall Street, and so I was really excited about AI. I thought it was right around the corner.
Yeah.
I thought data was just about to happen. It has happened, much bigger than I ever imagined, but it's taken a lot longer than I had anticipated.
No, it's true, and it's funny to think about it, because in those days we used to think about artificial intelligence and neural nets as a direct application of that being maybe credit card fraud identification or early warning systems and items like that, based on very, very large data sets. And obviously, looking today with ChatGPT and everything else, we were not at the point of thinking, yes, this will all help with natural language processing and even more interestingly into seeing if machines are about to crack the Turing test or not, right?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I now sometimes tell people that AI seems to have gone from being a sort of a curious application, or an application with some degree of curiosity, to becoming so pervasive that it's sort of probably even comparable to what I'd call a general purpose technology. It just seems to be everywhere. And these days you can't seem to have a conversation without ChatGPT coming up. How the world has changed.
It's true. It's to add on to that, it's almost similar to the shift that we've seen in business technology and more of the consumerization of business technology. Before 10 years ago, we would all look at our B2C platforms and be impressed at how easy it was to use a new technology and how quickly it could be adopted, be it Instagram, be it FaceTime, be it whatever you want. Certainly in a mobile format as well. And meanwhile, all of us working in the business world still had to deal with green screens and horrible UI and horrible user experience. And if you look at it from the perspective of artificial intelligence, again, 10, 20 some odd years ago, much, much harder to use, no consumer applications which were evident for anybody to use. If you knew anything about it, you knew that, yes, your technology interactions with some systems would involve some sort of artificial intelligence. In other words, understanding what you want to do, how you want to do it, improving the experience somewhat, some sort of personalization, if that's a word that's still even used. Whereas nowadays, it's just absolutely exploded because you've got the interface, right? Built on top of, call it, again, natural language processing with almost the Amazon Alexa being a precursor to that. Obviously, Google before that with more easily attainable search results than typing in SQL strings. So you kind of go step by step to a better interface. And you start hiding more and more of that complexity within that interface or that experience. And yeah, ChatGPT just seems to be the latest version of that. I have no idea what my kids are going to see.
Yeah, really. My previous guest was a former, actually a colleague, Sam Bowman at the Center for Data Science, and he's, his area is large language models. And I asked him, I said, I was just playing with ChatGPT 3, and I told it to create a story that started with, if you give a mouse a cookie. And I said, write me an adult story. And it said, no, I don't do adult stuff. I said, no, I mean like a story for grown-ups, And then it's, oh, sure, and then it, came up with the story about how this mouse woke up in the kitchen with all these grown-ups and he was scared and all that kind of stuff. And then he saw this kind old woman come in and she liked animals and took the mouse outside. And he was so happy to be with his family again and, lived happily ever after kind of thing. And I said, so how would you write an ending to the story? And it said, well, the mouse sort of realized that, it's the little things in life that matter, and the kindness of people and all that kind of stuff. And I asked Sam, how the hell does it do this? And he said, well, your guess is as good as mine. But while we're talking about AI, has this become sort of a central subject of conversation in your company as well? I mean, is everyone talking about ChatGPT and its potential to transform and disrupt business?
At different levels, yes. So there's the initial level of novelty, which is, wow, look at this. I asked it to tell me a joke and it did. How amazing is that? The second level would be almost augmented intelligence, if you will, which is somebody's trying to write a piece of code or debug a piece of code or come up with some way to create an interface between two systems and doesn't have all the information they need at the API level, whatever it is. And it's almost as if it's someone to do a code review, or I wouldn't go as far as calling it pair programming, but it's been a way to help assist the learning and eventually the execution of, say, a consultant working on a piece of code. So there's that level. Another level that we've started investigating internally that I'm sure many other consultancies are doing as well, so it's not for that novel, is how can you speed up the enablement of consultants and frankly increase their effectiveness. So as an example, let's say you want to write, if you're talking about Agile, you want to write a story on something specific. Can you ask the AI to give you examples of what is important to understand in a specific business process flow so that you can then break that down into specific stories? Yeah, of course you can. And it's funny because even on the sales side, we have sales outreach, naturally, like most companies do, and creation of copy, responses to inquiries. Again, it's a wonderful way to start something. It's not the end of it, but it's the start. And one of the general approaches I've taken with a lot of people, and I talk to all my employees on a regular basis, one of the questions that sometimes comes up is, well, what are we going to use this for? Should I be concerned? What's going on? We're going to have a job. And the short answer is everybody will have a job, at least in my opinion. But you're not going to lose your job to the AI, but you will lose your job to somebody who's using an AI. And if you're not. So it's absolutely crucial for everybody to become familiar with, at least in my industry, with the applications of ChatGPT, how it can make you become more effective, get jobs done in a faster way, help you with your creativity, stretch the thinking in different ways that you might not have thought of, synthesize approaches, and save time on searches and frankly, coming up a curve of learning. But at the end of the day, no, I don't believe, at least I hope that be the case, that an AI is going to come in and say, this manager is not needed anymore because the AI can do everything that manager can do. Famous last words, right? We'll talk in 20 years, and maybe there's a Slack bot that will just allocate resource, specific tasks to resources across the globe, monitor the completion of those via some sort of Jira API, and then come back and say, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? Which is, frankly, a lot of what basic management is. But again, that basic level of tasks is not sufficient, at least in my mind.
Yeah. I'm going to pursue this thread sort of outside of this podcast because I think there's a lot to talk about here. But I will say one thing in passing, and this has to do with some of my own interests, which are, when do computers and machines do better than just machines? It's been sort of one of my questions for a long time. And I've found very few instances of that. But recently I saw an experiment again by my colleague Sam, where he actually gave people a task that was done under time pressure. People had a finite amount of time to solve the problem. And he found that when they used the system to actually elicit information via natural language, right? So they were solving a non-trivial, difficult task. They could not solve it in the time allocated, but their queries to ChatGPT 3 enabled them to actually do better than they would unaided, right? So the control group was unaided, and the performance of the combination was also better than what ChatGPT 3 was able to do on its own, because it's a noisy language model, right? It's general purpose, but it doesn't actually tune itself to particular tasks. And the two tasks he considered, one was sort of medical stuff, where ChatGPT 3's ingested all kinds of knowledge, but it's still got lots of holes in it. And there was another task involving some complex business stuff, reading lots of things. And, the thing that sort of jumped out with me is that this is ideal for, let's say, consulting companies, because you're always under time pressure, right? There's never enough sort of hours in the day. And so I would conjecture for your kind of industry, it would be transformational, right?
Absolutely.
To be able to have access to a tool like that.
But then the counter I'll give you to that, and I think we've all read the stories, and again, I'm far from being anywhere near an expert in this, but we've all read the stories of the business school profs giving a test to an AI or ChatGPT specifically, and the AI passing with a B or a B minus, or specific parts of the bar for lawyers and so on. So from a retrieval perspective and a presentation perspective, it's definitely there. But again, I think I go back to the augmented component. In my mind, it has to go hand in hand. So as a consultant, you always need to have an impact on a client, period. If you have no impact on a client, then you're useless. Now, to have an impact on a client, first you need to understand if you're aligned on what that impact needs to be. Are you trying to reduce costs? Are you trying to increase sales? Are you trying to segment customer base? You need to understand that from their perspective. If you're able to align on what that impact is, then you can start coming up with ideas and creative approaches to add value, again, to solve that problem. In my mind, AI can help, again, push the creativity, ask questions, and provide lessons learned, if you will, from other situations that can help inspire a solution or an outcome. Having said that, if you have a lazy consultant and they're just typing in and saying, here, give me the answer, and maybe minor editing, you're not going to be adding much value to a client, because you're not understanding the context, you're not understanding the outcome, you're not understanding how to communicate it. Because that's, again, a large part of what consulting requires is an understanding of how to communicate and, frankly, how to sell ideas. It's not just saying I have a point of view, but it's convincing others of why that point of view makes sense and why it's impactful to the client in this particular situation, right?
That makes a lot of sense. But say a little more about what Plative does. What kinds, you said a little bit in the beginning about Salesforce consulting and tech consulting in general, but say a little bit more about what Plative does and what you do all day.
You got it. Well, I don't do much, Vasant. I'm a glorified cost center. So, if we go in that direction, there's not much value. But as a company, what we do is we're not in the business of saying, awesome, you want to understand how to do a better accounting for your business. Therefore, get away from Excel, get away from QuickBooks, and go to NetSuite. We're not in the business of saying, press a button, install NetSuite, move away, and that's that, right? Certainly there's a part of that. But if you look at NetSuite, if you look at Salesforce, both are business systems that require people, process, and technology changes to be effective. Change management comes into play. Again, an understanding of the impact and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So it never is just a question of, hey, I think I need Salesforce because I read about it on an airplane, and I hear it's good for tracking customer relationship management, or insert the business buzzword of the week that they get on the airplane magazine. It's a question of understanding, again, what are you trying to do and what are you trying to achieve as a business, and how does a technology, yes, from our perspective, Salesforce is the best technology for front office, if you will. There's a lot you can be doing in the back office too, but let's just focus on the front office for services, for sales, for marketing. There's a bunch of different areas, and that I'm not going to go there. And in the ERP space, inventory planning, warehouse management, accounting, et cetera, in the NetSuite space. The combination of both is very, very powerful. But again, going back to the original point, what do we do for our clients? We help them solve business problems using those technologies. So what could be a business problem? They want to reduce close time from 15 days to 5 days. They want to be able to provide accurate financial information to their investors, be it a private equity firm or just an individual shareholder. They want to be able to segment their clients. They want to be able to service their clients. They want to be able to provide a broader view and a better experience internally to their internal employees, either because they're trying to save costs, they're trying to save time, they're trying to increase their promoter scores with their clients. All of this ties back to what can they measure, what are they trying to measure, and why are they trying to measure these things, which all comes back down to business impact, at least in my mind. So that's what we try to do. Understand what the client has pains, requires business impact, and apply technology to solve those pains.
What do you sort of worry about and spend your time on, other than being a large cost center?
Right. So a couple of different things. So I think any manager needs to be focused on employee growth. And that goes directly back to leadership, right? So any manager is a leader, which isn't to say that if you're not a manager, you're not a leader. Quite the opposite. We have fantastic examples of plative, and I'm sure we all do in our different careers, of people who were not managers, but were fantastic leaders. And in my mind, one of the great qualities of a leader, at least that when I look for and try to build within any organization I'm in, is getting people to a better place. That requires you to understand what that better place looks like and making sure that people are aligned for that. But at the end of the day, it's getting them to a better place. So I spend a lot of time internally on enablement, on, call it cultural focus, right? Understanding how we communicate. Are we effective at communication? Are we leveraging data? Are we not leveraging data? Is a lot of it gut-oriented? Are we going too far towards data? We're not allowing creativity. So there's a lot of focus, especially as a growing company, any company, but certainly a consultancy, that you've got a lot of brain power, and you want to be able to get to the point that, yes, you're applying that brain power in a scalable, repeatable, and sustainable way to your clients and to your engagements, but also to internally, to your consultants internally, right? So first answer, our people. Crucial, got to focus on them. The second answer, certainly our clients. Not only understanding what they're trying to achieve, but how they're trying to achieve it, and how we can help them get to the point of achieving those things. And I find that our engagements that are the most successful ones, the ones that we can provide the most impact, is when we are adding value from the perspective of not just saying you should do this, but maybe you shouldn't do that. Or have you thought of doing the other thing? So again, it's having a very well-defined point of view and being able to present ideas in a way that not only are they digestible and understandable, because technology can get complex very quickly, it can devolve into technobabble, and in a way that different parts of the organization that we're touching, that we're working with, can then not only understand, but inculcate, and then, frankly, ideally, support and sell internally, right? So our employees and our customers. We obviously look at the industry as a whole, understand what our competitors are doing. We like to understand what the technology trends that we're seeing are. We get a lot of that information from the clients and the verticals that we focus on. We're very verticalized as well. So we need to understand what's going on both at a vertical level as well as an industry level to be able to, again, going back to your original point, add value. So that's how I would play it.
Yeah. So Paulo is just sort of pushing on this sort of leadership theme a little bit further. When did you sort of realize or feel that you were ready to be CEO? And I guess the other way to ask the question is, what does it really take to be the CEO of any organization, a consulting organization or any other organization? What are the sort of defining characteristics of a CEO?
Well, let me break it down a little bit, if I could, please. So first of all, there's a very big difference between the role and an individual. It's not as if the moment you're fortunate enough, lucky enough, experienced enough to be knighted a CEO that the entire world changes. It doesn't. You are still who you are. People may laugh at your jokes more because of your position. They may listen to you more because you've got a louder megaphone. But at the end of the day, you are no better than anybody else in the organization. Your ideas are no better than anybody else's in the organization. And in fact, my opinion, by definition, the CEO does not have all the answers. And if a CEO thinks that he or she does, then that's the first part of the downfall. And that's part of where the hubris comes in and the temptations come in. In my mind, the company as a whole will have the answers. So my job is to enable a process, a system, a mechanism, a cadence for people to raise issues, to tell us what we need to do better, to come up with creative ideas, to help us get to better places and answers. So to answer your first part of the question, when did I think I was ready to be a CEO? I'm still not sure that I am. Frankly, I don't think anybody should walk into that role and say, yeah, I'm ready, here we go. Okay, fine. You need some confidence, you need some abilities, you need some experience. But at the end of the day, at least my experience has been, every single day is a different day. Every single day I'm learning to be a better manager, period. Yes, I happen to carry a C-level title, but the point is still the same. I still need to continually focus, as everybody else does, on how I become a better manager. How do I listen better? How do I stop interrupting people? How do I talk less? I'm Brazilian, so I can't avoid that, but I try to. How I can be clearer in what I'm trying to communicate. I can understand more, listen more. So in my mind, yes, on one hand, there's a role, and then there's an individual, and it's a very dangerous thing to commingle the two. And unfortunately, I've seen these types of situations where people believe they have to act in a certain way because they carry a certain title. And the reality is, especially in I've come to see in my almost 30 years of working, the most authentic version of yourself in an organization is the one that people generally tend to respond the best to. And if you are putting on airs, if you're putting on approaches, or if you're using words because you think you need to do that, people aren't going to buy it. Right? So anyway, I would say that luck is certainly a part of it. Experience is certainly a part of it. I would add language. And what I mean by language is you need to be able to speak multiple languages. You got to be able to talk tech. You got to be able to talk finance. You got to be able to talk sales. You got to be able to talk marketing. You got to be able to talk all parts of the business, because at the end of the day, you don't need to know the most about all those different parts, but you need to be able to bridge all those different parts the most. And for that, it requires that knowledge.
I was going to ask you a sort of general question in my back pocket, which was, what does it mean to be literate these days? And I think you sort of answered that partially, which is you have to be able to speak multiple languages, right? It's the ability to talk at any level and to anyone in a way that makes sense. And I guess some of that sort of involves just being able to ask the right questions. The other thing you said was, the CEO doesn't have the answers. In fact, chances are the answers are sort of with other people in the organization. I guess my question is, like, how do you really get them out, right? How do you elicit them? And maybe this is an unfair question, but if you were the CEO of Google at this point, what would you be doing? Like, how would you be thinking about what the right questions are?
Yeah, no, I think that's crucial. There are a lot of different threads there, so let me try to pull them apart if I can. So, first of all, I'm absolutely incapable of being the CEO of a company of more than 1,000 to 2,000 people. So let's start there. I may be wrong, and I may be, again, eating my words in another 10 years when we meet again on another podcast, hopefully. But there's a level of complexity at an organizational level that requires a very, very different mindset. But I will say this: process orientation, systems orientation, data orientation, crucial, right? So I would say that there's a form of signal monitoring that a company of a certain size, and we focus on it at Plative, and I've seen it in smaller and larger companies done well. If you can first be attuned to what signals you should be listening to, if it's margin, if it's EBITDA, if it's number of leads, if it's number of opportunities closed, if it's close rate by stage, whatever it is, right? There are a bunch of different signals, net promoter score, engagement surveys, right? There's a bunch of different signals that you should be capturing. So that's step one. And unfortunately, many companies don't even get to that step because part of it requires technology, part of it requires investment, part of it requires, frankly, a focus on it. So signal capturing, I think, would be the first. Then there's filtering and processing and frankly, then analyzing and prioritizing, right? If you kind of go through that process. And you need to know what you're listening for, listen for it, analyze it, understand it, and then take action on it. And then frankly, just keep repeating the cycle, right? So you have to have that internal feedback loop. So in the case of Google, I think there are certain things that obviously are business drivers at a metric level that they are capturing. There are certain strategies that they're trying to change specific metrics based on actions, and they're trying to fail fast and all that kind of good stuff as well. But at a broad level, at a specific level as well, I go back to understanding what signals that you want to capture. Unfortunately, there's a lot of noise within those signals, so there's a lot of signal cleansing that needs to happen as well, right? And then you talked about the right question. So this is something I learned 20 years ago. I was in a room. It was my first job as a VP of .com 1.0, and we had a plethora of consultants that we were working with. And I remember being in a room with, I think, 6 or 8, maybe even 10 McKinsey consultants. So this is like, the cream of the cream of the cream. I had nothing but massive respect for all of them. And I remember being in this meeting with my manager, the COO, who had been doing this many, many years. And they went through this fantastic marketing strategy presentation, detailed. And it literally was, here are 4 slides, and you could have had just one presentation, be those 4 slides and walk away satisfied. And they had 20. So this one led to this, and that led to that conclusion, and that conclusion could lead to this. And it just kept going. I was in awe, absolute awe. And I remember the COO raising his hand and saying, I got a question. And, could you explain this a little bit deeper for me? One of the points in the slide. And I remember literally thinking to myself, this is kind of embarrassing. These people are brilliant. Just sit down and eat your popcorn and learn, right? And that one question, there was so much depth to the question, so much understanding of the broader question that was trying to be addressed, that led not to the unraveling of the entire presentation, because that wasn't the goal, but it led to such a deeper understanding and such a fantastic back and forth on other areas that the presentation missed or the analysis needed to be deeper on, that I was just dumbfounded by that. So I've always... And yes, and the next presentation was so much better and took into account. And of course, that became a collaboration, right? So it wasn't so much a question of, here's the right question to call somebody out and say, you're wrong and I'm right. And did you think about this? It was a question of, how can we improve the overall knowledge in the room? How can we get more neurons involved in processing this problem to get to the point of a better answer? So to me, that right question, there's never just one. The right question in my mind is never a yes or no. It's a, what does it lead to next? So that's one thing that I've tried to evolve. It's a hard skill because it requires you to shut up. It requires you to listen. So it's always hard. And the next skill also is to try to get different viewpoints from different people in the room, not just from a consensus building perspective, but from a different perspective, right? From their different perspectives. So it's really a question of not trying to get to that one shot, one kill. Here's the question, got it, awesome. But it's how do we get to a better answer overall, right? So that's kind of where it is. Now, part of the problem with this, there's a cultural component to this. And what I mean by that is many times in situations, and certainly I have to be very cautious about this given my role, and that one of the many things I've learned. Not that my questions carry more weight, but I always have to be very cautious of how I ask these questions, because I don't want these questions to be seen as, this is my thought, this is my opinion, and I'm leading you in that direction. And you're wrong, and I don't agree with you, and you don't have the credibility. Which is why these questions have to be framed, at least in my opinion, as, have we thought about this? This is a counter to that. Can we explore that a little bit more? Again, with the intent of getting to a better answer overall.
It's interesting as I was listening to you, this, asking the right question and how one has to be careful, I guess, especially in a position like yours, as to how the question is asked and framed. Because I sometimes have students ask me, like, what are you looking for? And I'm like, I'm not looking for anything. I'm just asking a question. There is a tendency for people to view someone in the position of authority and ask, what's he looking for? What's she looking for? And to kind of push back against that and say, I don't know what I'm looking for. I'm trying to ask a question.
Exactly. And I think part of that also is never, and this is also another danger, it never should be seen as you're attacking a person. The goal is we're attacking an issue, right? And to your point, people try to understand agendas. And look, I get it. We're all humans. We're social animals. You have two people in a room. There are different agendas. Understood. But as long as we can move away from those agendas and move closer to the issue that we're trying to address, and look, no one's going to be completely 100% dispassionate. You don't want that, frankly. That's ChatGPT. That's AI. You don't want that. You want passion. You want creativity. You want human engagement. You want human involvement. So how do you get that in a productive, positive manner? By attacking an issue, as opposed to someone thinking that they are being attacked, or their viewpoint or their credibility is being attacked by a question, right? So,
yeah,
fun stuff.
Yeah. So, Paulo, there's a number of ways, I guess, I could take the conversation at this point, but I want to ask you, and this is going to be of interest, I guess, to students, not just business school students, but students in general who are interested in pursuing consulting careers. How should they be preparing for this world? And I guess it relates to my earlier question about literacy. What does it mean to be literate these days? And the bar just keeps going up. The bar is just so much higher than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So how should people be thinking about preparing for this world that is just changing, but it seems to be going in a certain direction?
No, thank you for reminding me. I didn't pick up that thread. So let's talk about literacy for a quick second. Something which is somewhat near to my heart. I started off my academic career in liberal arts. I studied comparative literature and a bunch of other things, Japanese and Asian studies. I was all over the place, partly because I didn't really know where I wanted to go, partly because I was just intellectually curious. So again, from a biased perspective, I will say the first thing is you have to be intellectually curious, because consumption and processing and synthesis, more importantly, of information is crucial. So when you talk about literacy, again, I go back to the languages. There are multiple different languages that you need to become literate in, or at least familiar with. Human communication, macroeconomics, technology, financial accounting statements. I could go on and on and on, depending on the field of study you want to focus on. And I strongly believe having a broad viewpoint allows you to take information from different angles, which allows you to attack a question or an issue from multiple angles and not just look from one specific perspective. I think you're going to catch me out on this one. I think it was Terrence that said, I am a human, probably a man, given the ages. I'm a man, and nothing beyond humankind is beyond my interest. And I know I butchered that quote. But the main point here is the same. Yeah, I think you have to be a voracious consumer of information, not social media, but information, to be able to look at things from multiple perspectives. So if I look at it from a student's perspective, right? Because why did I go back to B school? I went back to B school because I didn't have that tool set. I had a fantastic analytical framework. I had some idea of how to read and write and analyze and throw, the lackluster brain I have at different problems. But if you talk to me about cash flow, I had no clue about what cash flow meant. Debits, credits, I had no idea what that's about, right? So there was a whole arsenal, a whole tool set that I needed to gain to be able to be conversant, in my case, in a business situation when I was doing consulting and then later on. So that's what B School gave me. So I built an arsenal, from macro to microeconomics to finance to tech to organizational behavior. I don't know what they call it nowadays, but and obviously everything else that I could fit within that approach to give me the skill sets that would make me not just conversant, superficially conversant, but conversant in a credible way in a different environment, and even more importantly, to give me the baseline from which I could then build. Because when I got my first job out of B School, and I was a summer intern at an e-commerce software company, and I walked in and I was like, oh, this case study, this framework, that. And folks looked at me and said, yeah, whatever. But that's not solving how we prioritize the features for this particular product that you need to focus on as a product manager, right? So that became a platform on top of which I could apply and build. So that's what I would add. I think literacy becomes a platform on top of which not only can you segment and store data or knowledge, if you want to think of it that way, but categorize what you're going to focus on versus what you're not, what your blind spots are, what you need to hire for on your team, what your strengths are, what your strengths are not. And again, it's that categorization of the toolbox, of the quiver, however, whatever analogy you want to use, which in my mind, literacy defines, refines, and frankly requires.
That's really interesting. You're talking about sort of the language and the toolkit. But I couldn't also but help pick up on the fact that you grew up in Brazil. You spent some time in Japan. How much of a role has this sort of global outlook played in your career and in your success? Because I've heard this like several times. People say, like travel, go to the other parts of the world. And, I sometimes, tell people that, I hitchhiked from Kabul to London in the 70s. And at that time, the world changed every 100 miles. It was a different world every 100 miles. Whereas these days, the world has become so much smaller. Language has become common. Everyone says no worries. I think that originated in Australia. So the world's become a much smaller place. And yet people talk about, the importance of being global. So how important is that?
So I'm very biased here. I speak a couple of languages, some better than others. I've traveled to, many different countries. I've been fortunate enough to be able to live in a couple of them. And to me, it's absolutely crucial. And the reason why it's absolutely crucial is because what it enables you to see face to face is the fact, and we have the benefit of living in New York City, which we see this every single moment on the subway, right? There are a lot of different types of people in the world, a lot of different approaches to living, a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different reactions. And I'm not saying that we need to be open and accepting of every single one of those. And, we can talk about cultural relativism at another point. But what I will say is that you need to at least be aware of all of that, to be able to speak these different languages, to be able to communicate with different people. Now, I think you and I are from the generation that we would get afraid or even use Lonely Planet and a ticket and some cash and go. And wherever you end up is wherever you end up. If you're in the back roads with no hotel and you don't speak any German, but you need to find a place to sleep for the night, which is not the park, you're going to figure it out. So we did not, and I'm going to sound a little bit like an expert here, I apologize. We did not have Google Translate and Google Maps and Venmo. We had the cash that we had in our pocket and whatever else we could figure out, Facebook if we had one, right? So that definitely helped me build a flexibility, a resilience, if you will, and an openness to new experiences and maybe even risk taking, if I think about it. That is something I hope that my children will have. I hope that others get to experience as well. And that to me is something that, yes, absolutely travel brings. I think exposure to different aspects of life brings. But I think your reaction to those things as well is very, very different. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I would consider sleeping in the bomb shelter in Xi'an, China. That was, 3 stories down below and smelled of things that I probably should not repeat on this podcast. Nowadays, it's a different story. I don't want to do that anymore, right? But those types of experiences, I think, help you become more resilient, more open, and more adventurous. And I think that can't do anything but help. As long as those are, and I think this is a crucial component, as long as those are balanced with other things in life, right? You can travel your entire life. And I've met people that did that. They had a tiny backpack and all they did was be on the road for years and years and years. And it was a wonderful way of living for them. It wouldn't work for me. And then I also know people who have had amazing careers, but when it comes to travel, at best they go to resorts and they never see anything else. So again, a lack of balance there as well. So I think this globalism, be it throwing yourself into a new language, which you just sound like a moron in, or a 4-year-old, and learning how to communicate and be humbled by that, being part of a whole new culture that you have no idea of how to act or react or respond, and not go back to, well, this is how I do it in my country, but no, let's understand how you do it in yours. I think is absolutely, absolutely crucial. And again, dealing with communication, dealing with personal growth, and dealing with adversity in general. So I'm a huge fan. And the good news is I'm married to an amazing woman who shares that view. So together we've gone all over the place, and that's the plan going forward as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, travel and the world has always played a big part of my life. It's amazing how much there is to see and how little time there is to see it in, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to ask a question on behalf of one of my students, who sort of aspire to be in your position, and that is like, how do you avoid sort of the pitfalls? What are some of the sort of common mistakes that people make? Either in terms of when they're applying and going through trying to get that entry level position, and then sort of subsequently in their career. Like what advice can you give people as to how they should think about this?
I think it's fair. I think you always have to question your motivations. And this may sound a little flippant, and it's not, because I'm very fortunate to be where I am, and I very much understand the importance of the role and frankly how difficult it is to get here. But it may sound a little strange, but my goal was never to be a CEO. My father kind of laughs about it with me. He says, "Yeah, you're an accidental CEO." And the truth is, my goal was always to grow in my career and to have as much impact as possible and to be able to learn as much as possible and to have fun along the way. And, when I was a chief operating officer of a 1,000+ person company, when I was part of a company at the very beginning of my career that went public, in the software area and things like that, those were just great experiences. But, when I was fired from a declining revenue-based e-commerce startup, when I was let go as part of the third round of layoffs in another company. Those, were also part of the journey. So again, if I were to tell you that luck didn't have a part to play in any of this, I would be overly arrogant. So certainly working hard and exposing yourself to opportunities, taking risks, being in a position that you can take risks is a big part of that. But I would always question the motivation, right? Do you want to become a C-level executive, be that what it is, because you want the title, because you want the adoration of employees, because you want that stamp on a resume, because you want the salary, because you want the excitement of the role, because you want to have the impact on people, because you want to be able to leverage all your skills and experience, and it's the right next move. I think those are all questions that you have to continually ask, because again, that will help define potentially, because again, luck is always a part of that. It will define the outcome that you will get to or not. So I would say continually examine your motivations. I think another one I would throw out there, because I can't help myself, have balance in all things. If your goal is to make a ton of money, fantastic, go for it. If that's your only goal, well, I would question that. I would ask what else is going on, right? Certainly find your own path, but try not to trample over others while you're doing that. So again, I think the balance component and understanding motivations is crucial. And the third thing I will say, at least it's worked well for me, don't take yourself too seriously. Again, I go back to the individual versus the role. Yes, the role is a serious role. Absolutely. The impact that you need to drive to, the outcomes you need to achieve, the importance of what the company is trying to do. Absolutely. The role? Absolutely. Does that mean you? No. You are who you are. You're just inhabiting the role right now. Do your best with the role as you have it, but don't be defined by it.
Well said, Paulo. I mean, I guess the more sort of general takeaways I'm taking away are, things like, I guess, the importance of just being authentic and having some sort of clarity in what's important to you, and all those good things. Where do people make mistakes? Like where do people sort of go wrong? Is it that they just sort of lose sight of what's important, or bad luck, of course, is something you can't avoid. I mean, you probably felt like crap when you were laid off, and that's just you maybe even doubt yourself and things like that. So I get that, but what are the other things that you can control that you should be sort of cognizant about? Where you sort of have these warning flags that go off that say, don't go there or don't do that. Like what are the sort of obvious things that one should be aware of and not make sort of mistakes along the way?
I would say a couple of different things. You talk about mistakes. You're making mistakes every day. That's part of the game. If you're looking at not making mistakes, then you're playing the wrong game. I actually heard this from another guy the other night. I'm gonna call him out and bring it up. I think it was wonderful. He said, if you're in a poker tournament and you're not prepared to lose every single amount that you're betting, you shouldn't be in the poker tournament. Now, I don't gamble. I'm not a poker player, but that made sense to me because, again, you need to understand the game that you are trying to play and the constraints of what you're trying to play within. So what the analogy I'll make here is that if you are trying to build a career, you need to understand the risks. You need to understand that there are going to be mistakes made. There are going to be failures. There's no such thing as an overnight success. It took me, I guess, if I would be slightly presumptuous about this, it took me 30 years to get to this position. And like I said before, it wasn't even a goal. Not to say that I'm being flippant about it. It's just that it turned out well so far. We'll see next year, the year after, what happens. But for now, it's working out very well, and I'm, very, very happy and humbled that it is. But maybe I'll go back to Kipling, right? You got to meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. So just keep doing what you're doing and learn from what you're doing. Don't fall into the trap of, wow, I suck at this, or I'm really good at this. Those are imposters. Just keep doing what you're doing, I guess.
So, talking about mistakes, and it's true, we all make mistakes. I teach a class on systematic investing and talk about all the mistakes humans make in terms of investing, that I'm still as terrible as I was at, making investment decisions, as I was, 30 years ago. I haven't gotten any better at that. But what kinds of decisions do you actually get better at versus decisions where, it's just sort of a crapshoot, like investing? Some people are really good and get better, but most people don't, right? So what are the kinds of things where you feel that you've gotten better versus things that, where you don't?
Well, let me build up the context here, right? On one hand, experience can be very, very helpful because you've seen a lot of different things. You have the scars, you've seen the outcomes, and you can come to conclusions in a faster way than others who have not. And you've internalized those approaches to decision making and those outcomes. But that can also lead to hubris, and not to quote Star Wars, but hubris can lead to the dark side, right? And to mix metaphors here, your spider senses get more refined, but it's dangerous to over rely on them. Now, I will say to all my founder friends and all my entrepreneur friends out there, they've got incredibly refined guts, and they can come to decisions and outcomes very, very quickly. So I'm not that. I'm not a founder. I'm a hired sword. So it's a different conversation here. But I tend not to over rely on gut. Use it as one more decision point, right? Or one more way to make a decision just based on gut. Crash it against data, crash it against experience, and then go from there. But so I would say that decisiveness is crucial in any managerial role, and certainly coming to a decision, snap decision making isn't. So I would say you get better at process thinking. If I can, put the mirror on myself, you get better at process thinking. You get better at having an orientation and a focus on data, understanding change management and human behavior, or trying to, because that's just an ongoing study for the rest of my life. Negotiation, consensus building. So, the harder skills, the softer skills, you can get better at those the more you focus on it and the more you do it. And very, very importantly, with the better role models and mentors that you're exposed to. So that to me has been, at least in my situation and my experience, has been crucial. Sometimes you're just not going to be good at decisions because there are just too many variables. So you just have to go for it, pilot it, fail fast, and then learn from that and keep iterating and take more of an agile approach, right? Go to market approaches, potentially pricing, product market fit at times. Again, it depends on how much investment you want to make. So there, you can start understanding patterns and identifying patterns, or maybe even matching patterns and in processes and situations and people and behaviors and motivations. But at the end of the day, the frameworks change, the context change, right? So decisions that I would have been a part of, or maybe not even been a part of 30 years ago when I was still wearing a suit and tie and sat in a cubicle, the way decisions were made then were very, very different than the way decisions are made now. Command and control versus a lot more collaboration and involvement and engagement. So that you can't get complacent. And then taking it one step further, at an individual level, I'm going from the macro to the micro here. If you go to the individual level, every single person is going to be different. So if you overgeneralize how you make decisions based on specific situations, then you're toast.
As you were talking, I was thinking, you mentioned how experience can be a double-edged sword. It can be an asset and it can be a liability, right? And that's sort of what I was trying to get at, like what kinds of things do you get better at? I guess you get better at telling people don't try that, or that's unlikely to succeed, right? Through experience. On the other hand, it's, you wonder whether your experience is actually getting in the way and whether someone might actually have a brilliant new idea. So it's a challenge, isn't it, to sort of to strike that right balance?
100%. And the Japanese have a saying called beginner's mind. And the idea of a beginner's mind is whenever you're starting something new that you've never done, you go into it with a completely open mind, and you're open to failure, and you're open to not knowing what you're doing and just trying different things, right? And to give you the counter to that, and to tie it back to your thought, when you have experience, it's harder for you to have a beginner's mind, because you walk in with some scars, with some experience, with some predetermined outcomes and conclusions, which many times will close you off to other alternatives and other forms of thinking, and even worse, input from other people that can help you, right? So that's why, again, it comes back, at least in my mind, to a specific form of balance. You need to be open to feedback, which for many people is difficult, and myself included at times. I'd be remiss in saying if that weren't the case. And balancing that with what you think you know versus what you actually do know versus what you're actually seeing. Because again, it's the signals are out there or not, the data is out there or not, etc.
It's just so important to always have that beginner's mind, isn't it? Even with all that experience. I'm working with some people now, and I've been trading systematically for so many 30 years, and I'm working with some people now who are half my age and who have a completely different way of looking at things, and I'm learning from them as well. It's just because the world changes. People have new ideas, and it's easy to sort of fall into that trap of like, I've got that experience.
Oh, 100%. Going back to Plative is a people business. We are a consultancy, but at our very heart, we are a people business. So if I walk into a room, if I walk into a meeting, if I walk into a situation, and again, going back to one of the original points, and I have an answer, first of all, it doesn't mean it's the answer, right? I have one answer, I have one perspective. Second, I got to hear from other folks as well. And you could literally have, the marketing intern come up with a great idea that may not be the best idea, but it leads the group to another form of thinking and a different approach. And if you don't create an environment that people can share those ideas, now obviously it can go to an extreme. You can't just have people talking all the time, and it doesn't get to an outcome. So there's got to be some moderation within that as well, or curation of it. But at the end of the day, as much information as you can get from as many different sources for the right reasons in the right way, not only increases buy-in, helps with change management, but frankly, it gets you to a better place as well on an outcome. So, but it's hard, because many people, again, the more experience you have, the more you feel like you got an answer right now. You don't.
Indeed. It can indeed be a liability. So, Paulo, how has COVID changed the nature of work, and especially your work?
So, a couple of different ways, Vasant, and I apologize in advance for potentially pontificating a little bit too much, because there are a lot of different opinions in this, right? I've gone from the days of wearing a suit in a cube to wearing shorts and being barefoot and on Google Meets all day long. And I will tell you, there are pros and cons to each. Naturally, there's a bit of a weak force, strong force dichotomy here, in the sense that when you're closer with each other and you can hang out together, and there's a lot more serendipitous activity and conversation and learning, that creates a stronger bond, I would say. When you don't have that, it's a lot more transactionally oriented. It's a lot more regimented and regulated. And it's harder to maintain that strong bond. So it becomes more of a weak force at a distance, right? How do you maintain those bonds with the organization? So part of that is a difficult thing to maintain and focus on and ensure that it happens. But what's interesting, though, is on the other hand, we don't have to worry about commutes. We have significantly greater amounts of flexibility. And at Plative specifically, because it is a professional services consultancy, and most of our people are focused on delivery, and we can look at what their activity is based on the quality of the work they deliver, the amount of time they spend delivering it, the actual deliverables that are created, and the output that's actually generated. We can see if someone is being productive or not productive. So there's no question, at least at Plative, of is somebody doing their job or not? Well, no, it's there. It's great. And we'll hear from the client as well. And on the sales side, same thing. If you're closing deals, we're closing deals. It's all good. So from our perspective, at least from my perspective, the remote approach does require a bit of a level set, which is you need to regulate your day. You need to be able to go out and take the dog for a walk. You need to be able to take some time and say hi to your son when he walks in the door, or your daughter as she walks out of the door. And if you're able to, again, balance those things, I think it's, at least in my opinion, it's a very effective way of working, as long as you don't dehumanize it and make it absolutely transactional. You got on the call? Yep. Hi, this is the agenda. This is what we've done. Great. Awesome. Thank you. Goodbye. It's very, very easy to fall into that trap and forget about people being people, as opposed to just your coworkers or colleagues or a task that needs to be checked off a box.
Yeah. But on balance, do you think this has made you more productive?
I would say in many ways, yes. I also happen to be a pretty calendar-oriented, time-boxed type of individual. So I learned that discipline many, many years ago of working within a constraint of time, both being a father and a husband and having children I need to come back home to as well. But more broadly, as you have more people that you need to interact with, clients, customers, etc., you need to be very, very judicious with your time and be very, very intentional with it. So the management of time absolutely worked for me from the beginning. Other people who are in more creative fields and are not used to being in meetings all day long or communicating via conversation don't like it as much. I see it. I have a friend of mine who's a CEO at a software company, and his approach is exactly the opposite. His approach is everybody comes to the meeting having written what they wanted to discuss, sent it out to everybody. Everybody's processed it beforehand. So we get to the meeting, which are much, much smaller meetings and less frequent meetings, and they get to work and they move ahead. I find that fascinating, and it works for their culture. So again, it will certainly depend on the culture you're working in. It will certainly depend on the motivations of the individuals working with you. It will also depend on the outcomes. Now, from a cultural perspective, it's a difficult thing to reconcile. And being described as a bridge generation, Generation X, we talk to everybody. We can communicate with everybody. And understanding that is a very difficult thing or a very important thing, because folks, the generation above mine, if you're not in the office, you're not working, right? You first in, last out, right? And that's absolutely not the case with the current generations of workers. It's measure me on my progress. Don't expect me to commit myself completely to my job. I have a whole life outside of that. And if I'm not able to incorporate that within the job and what I'm trying to do, I don't want to work with you. So again, it's that multiplicity of viewpoints that you need to synchronize and adjust and address for, which I think causes a lot of that tension and friction. And look, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, it will certainly shake itself out and become much more of a new norm. But I find it great, and I find the flexibility crucial. And I find that, on the balance, again, given the industry that I am with the folks that I work with, it's working quite well. Despite a lot of the drawbacks, I would love to get more people together infrequently on a frequent basis and in a social basis. It's a question of budget. I would just love to be able to say, let's go to an arcade tomorrow. Let's go to a happy hour the day after. Let's go just hang out. That is missing. It's horrible.
Yeah.
That
but on balance, do you think it's made Playdiv more productive, or is it hard to say?
I think it's hard to say. Again, you're getting one viewpoint from one perspective. It's the bigger question in my mind is how do the employees in general find it? We run engagement surveys. We have a lot of different methods for getting input. For the most part, people seem to be okay with it. Now, to be fair, there's a self-selection component here as well. Don't forget, right? It's not as if we happened to be on site and then became remote first. Playdiv, this is before my time. There are many things that Playdiv did so well before I joined, and that try not to change. Playdiv was remote first before I joined. So the shift from being a remote first organization with some office activity and some social activity to none during COVID to less afterwards has not been as bad. But other organizations, exactly the opposite. But having said that, it's fascinating to me. I have this conversation with my wife all the time. We can't imagine being in the office 5 days a week. It's so alien to us right now, but that was our professional life for 20, 25 years.
Indeed, yeah. How things have changed. Yeah. Paulo, it's been fun chatting. I'm so glad we reconnected and had this conversation. Any closing thoughts or pieces of advice for people who might be tuning into this program, including students?
Well, thank you for that. First of all, like I said, this was a blast to do, not only because it was reconnecting with you, but of course the topics. We could go on, I'm sure, for much longer, but we can't beg that indulgence of your listeners. But what I would say from a student perspective, and I say this as someone who has guest lectured, who is an adjunct professor, who was a high school English teacher, millions of years ago, and just loves the idea of trying to impart knowledge. So what I would suggest to MBAs nowadays, or your students in tech MBAs specifically, focus on being that bridge, focus on being that interpreter. It doesn't mean that you need to know the most about tech or business, but you have to know enough to be credible, like I said before, be able to ask the right questions, be able to connect both of the worlds. The analogy I'll give here is nobody who takes a shower in the morning thinks of the water filtration systems and the aqueducts and the underlying infrastructure of pumps that requires to exist to bring water from one place to another so that you can wash your hair. Nobody cares about that, except for the people who are absolute experts in those. They care about washing your hair and coming out of the shower clean, right? As a tech MBA, you kind of need to understand both. You need to understand what pH of water means, and if it's hard or soft, and the flow capacity of a specific pipe. But you also need to know what that individual is trying to do and what's the plan of the architect and designing the bathroom. Is it a bathtub? Is it a shower? Is it whatever it is, right? So you need to be able to connect those things. And you need to be able to talk to the water technicians. You need to be able to talk to the filtration and sanitation department. And you need to talk to the architects. And obviously you need to talk to the people that are taking a shower. So there's a lot of different things there that you kind of need to learn and be able to not be an expert in, but at least be able to have a credible conversation about.
Paulo, thanks for that. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for being on the show. It has been a blast, and it's been great to reconnect. So thank you for your time, and we will reconnect and talk more about ChatGPT and all kinds of other good stuff.
Can't wait. Vasant, thanks again.
My pleasure.